Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of the Cohash LinkedIn Live series. I'm here with Tim Martin, a data security veteran out of Texas. Tim leads our engineering and customer success organizations. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Heather. It's great to be with you virtually.
Thanks for joining us today. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking through compliance, specifically the compliance readiness tools created by Cohash. So Tim, in the last year, I would say we've hit an inflection point when it comes to data privacy regulations. As you can see in the furthest left-hand column, pre-22, there were a good amount of privacy regulations, but come 2023, we're seeing at least 5 state regulations that are coming into effect. And this includes stricter regulations in California via CPRA. Tell us a little more about how Cohash is helping our customers meet compliance.
That's right, Heather. With that in mind, that changing landscape, we've created some really cool additions to our data security platform. And our company's name is Cohash. Our product set is called Qostodian. And in that umbrella of that platform, we have 2 tiers of products. Both of them are intended to really focus on unstructured data, to ferret out and find those bits of data that's considered sensitive, or PII, if you will. Mm-hmm. And the reason why that's so important is that really is the foundation of what these regulations are built to protect. And so the foundational aspect of our data privacy strategy is to create an inventory of sensitive data in your ecosystem, independent of the type of repository you may be storing that data. Cloud storage is new and bright and shiny, but there are years worth of historical and archive data out there in on-prem file servers that may be dusty, but it's bound to have a lot of sensitive data on there. And all of that could potentially pose a security risk. Now we take that data and then we look at the flip side, who has access to it or who has accessed it. And that helps us build a risk profile for those employees. And from those 2 points of view, then we can build real-time alerts with respect to sensitive data handling. We can turn around and have a tangible report for auditors or executives. And then we quickly understand the extent of an incident. Could it be a breach or a leak? That regulators require just-in-time notification for the customers. So you don't have to waste a lot of time trying to find that information. We've got it at your fingertips.
Great. And we'll go into a bit more detail about how all of these relate to compliance as we go through them. But let's jump in. I'm curious to see more about the 2 foundational elements you mentioned. Let's start with the sensitive data inventory.
Sure. So under the umbrella of the Qostodian suite that I mentioned, our first tier is called Recon. And on the screen here, you can see that we've been able to scan a file system repository, and we've programmatically taken the data and put it into some categories and classifications. Those classifications is exactly what relates to the regulations that we mentioned earlier. For instance, Social Security and credit card numbers, those are almost in every single one of the compliance elements that we're worried about. And so we've done a pretty cool thing of taking and allowing a view of the data inside of Recon by the regulation. And in this example, if I were to click on PCI DSS here, you'll see that it will take me to a detailed view of the data. And we have all of our files on the left-hand side. But what's really important to note is over here on the right-hand side in the info column, how many pieces of sensitive information happen to be in that one file. And this begins to be one of the key differentiators between us and the other guys in the industry. They may be able to scan the data and they tell you that there's one there, but they don't tell you how many, or they don't maintain specific information about that sensitive data element.
And I understand that this is foundational to compliance in the sense that while there's a lot of nuance between the different regulations coming out of each state, almost every single one of them will require that any amount of personal information collected, that there is an inventory of exactly how much you have and where it's all stored. So this clear map of sensitive data is essential for everything that's going to come after this.
You're exactly right. And not only from an operational aspect for your security operators, but I mentioned earlier reports that are very tangible to be able to left behind that shows just exactly what the breakdown of the risk is by department, by sources, by individuals. These are the kind of things that you want to be able to send an auditor to the golf course early. You don't need him poking around. And this is what they require to have that information to understand. Not only do you understand where your sensitive data is, but what are the next steps you're taking to protect it, and in many cases to remediate those vulnerabilities.
And you mentioned one of the core differentiators of the platform is our ability to, unlike alternatives which operate primarily at the file level, we're doing what we call the street level view of risk, which is going one layer deeper, looking at the data elements, tracking those data elements, both on-prem locations, including workstations, and now most recently within Microsoft 365 cloud applications. But so can you tell us a little bit more about what cross-referencing the granular data elements and the behavior of people enables for folks from a compliance perspective?
Sure. All of these compliance regulations are intended to get you to understand what is your risk and to protect both your consumers, customers, employees. And so being able to have a perspective that is relevant to either one of those approaches is really important. And so on the screen, this now is a console of our Qostodian Prime application. This is our second tier. It's intended to really take a look at those endpoints and where data is created or consumed, and be able to give you a better understanding of how data moves between end users, between repositories, potentially even external to your organization. The thought is, if I show you what's going on, you can, put an end to those things that are unsanctioned exfiltrations. And so on this screen, I'll get a little bit deeper here. We've got a view of the overall organization risk, as you can see, and we have a list of the amounts of unique sensitive information accordingly. And that very specific risk is all based and tailored on how you configure your environment. And so like in Recon, where we had low, medium, and high, I've also created similar categories, but those values are assessed with a risk score based on which ones you consider to be the highest risk for your organization. So again, going back to our main console, we see that this one individual has a lot of risk associated with his activities. And furthermore, his behavior, as you mentioned, Heather, what drives that comparative to his peers may warrant a tighter scrutiny of what he's doing with that data. And so driving further into the list, you can see the sensitive information. And as I take a look at the details, you'll see that, again, we're driving what's the regulation exposure that this data, this very specific data, can abide by.
And it's my understanding that typically it's required that companies report within 24 to 72 hours the extent of a breach. Can you show a little bit more about how we help them meet those?
Yeah, absolutely. If I've got a very robust and comprehensive inventory of my sensitive data elements, not just the files, but the elements themselves, I can do a lot of new things with respect to reporting. And I'm a security wonk, so I'm curious about how things go on inside the environment. But when I know that a file has been breached, I can do something very simple as a reverse search. Again, this is only available if you are indexing the sensitive data string itself. And so on this view of the reverse search, I can see the credit card value that I'm looking for. I can see all the different files in my ecosystem where that appears and all the different users that have access to those files.
So with
Down,
seconds, Tim, just to repeat back, because of the novel data element tracking technology, folks can drop in a credit card number, for example, and just see every person and every location that it touched, right? And also all the, just see an inventory of everywhere where it exists. And that's just, in a couple of clicks.
That's exactly right. And when you're doing that incident investigation, it's really important to understand when and where it took place, because then you can take those artifacts and you can build a case to understand, do I have collusion between employees to exfiltrate data? Is it something that is just a bad business practice that we need to do a better job of controlling that information? And so you can see the very first date and time that that information appeared, 5 different files it was in, and then shortly thereafter, the second user got access to it, and then the third. And so now we're building this breadcrumb trail of investigation that you can really have a better understanding of where that data was first acquired, where it potentially went to.
And it sounds like, based on this information, you can then put policies in place that are preventative. Could you show a little bit more about, all of this amounts to making it demonstrable to auditors that you're taking steps to, have policies and to enforce them. Can you show how we also help make that possible?
Certainly. So obviously, there's the first things first, right? You have to make sure that you build a policy, and then you can enforce it.
Right.
Our goal is to give you the tools to take those written policies and at least alarm or begin to build workflows. And so we're building out this process of alerts that looks a lot like a conditional workflow. And we get really granular with it too. We can define the scope, what people or departments are you monitoring, and what conditions must they exist. 1 or 2 credit cards may be natural for your job, but you get 100 and that starts to look like an exfiltration opportunity. So you can build the conditions and the actions that correspond to that. And corrective actions could be simply a matter of a pop-up on a desktop that says, this is in violation of our policy. Please cease and desist. Allow them to put a business justification in. So you've got a log of what's happening when and why. Or maybe this is, you have 0 tolerance rule. And so being able to either delete the item, encrypt it, or take some other corrective action, all of these things are being built into our workflows.
And that's great because, as regulations do require that proof of enforcement, right? So policies for protecting confidentiality, security of customer information.
That's right. And it's really good that you can do endpoints, or you can do file servers, but the comprehensive view and amalgamated dashboard of all of your ecosystems, what we're driving at. So I'll show you that once again, back in Jamie's world, where we had a running list of all the sensitive data, you'll see that there are multiple sources defined, and the risk is expanded based on every occurrence of those sensitive data elements. So whether it's on a OneDrive or it's his local workstation, we're trying to bring that view in a comprehensive manner so you know exactly what's going on in your environment.
Well, it's great, Tim. I love it. And, thank you so much for joining us today. For those in the audience, we'd love to hear your compliance related questions. We'd also just love to hear if you have any questions about the platform itself. Tim and I will drop our contact information into the comments. And join us back here next Friday. We'll be doing this on Fridays at 2 p.m. Our product team is going to be talking about our new integration with Microsoft 365. And in the meantime, you'll see on the bottom of the screen, if you'd like to check out our Qostodian scanning engine, you can head over to demo.cohash.com.